Our next speaker is Bryan Simmons. He's an Army veteran, native of Massachusetts. He's a past master of Ezekiel Bates Lodge in Attleboro. He has held many pillar offices, several appended bodies, and currently serves on the several committees of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, as well as several standing committees for the city of Attleboro, Massachusetts. Brother Simmons thrives behind the scenes, in behind-the-scenes work. For most notable accomplishment, however, is the founding of Masonicon in 2016 at Ezekiel Bates Lodge, of which all these Masonicons across the United States really took off and took really key points from. So it's just really amazing to have it kind of full circle. And when we started Masonicon Chicago planning, he was the first guy we knew we had to book. So he is really into fraternalism and education. He co-hosts 2 podcasts, Worthy and Well Qualified and Arts, Parts, and Points, an exchange of Masonic education and ideas. So, brothers, please put your hands together for Brother Bryan Simmons.
Thank you.
Dark. It'll adjust that. Just because the screen is so.
Well, it won't stay on white, so it's all right. So why hope? Since I joined Freemasonry, I've often asked myself that question. If hope ends in fruition, then why is it in our ritual at all? Should we not be focusing on taking action and accomplishing our goals rather than hoping? I mean, sure, taking action doesn't have the same ring with, faith, taking action, charity. I get it. But I'm sure our forefathers could have come up with some obsolete word that we would have trouble saying if they really wanted to. In most cases, I view hope as a mask for sloth. Too often we find Freemasons hoping the next guy in the door is going to fix their problems, fix their lodges, when they're the ones that are capable of doing it. When the great architect of the universe created us, we were given specific traits that allow us to choose our path, or at least make decisions. Every decision we all made in our lives got us right here, today. As I look back, much of what I hoped for in my life didn't come to fruition. I'm glad it didn't. Take a minute and think back on all the things you hoped for in your younger days. How many times did you hope that girl or guy would go out with you? And then the next week you hoped a different girl or guy would go out with you. Let's just say hope and fruition back then was rare. Friedrich Nietzsche said, "Hope is the worst of all evils, for it prolongs the torment of men." Freemasonry has preserved for centuries by men acting, not hoping, for a better future. Yet hope is across our rituals. Can we not rely on faith alone? Is it time to replace hope with action? Jim Carrey during a recent commencement, hope walks through fire, faith leaps over it. My presentation today is my research through hope to explore if hope has value today, or if it's just another word that has been corrupted by man for his own wants. I started with what I knew of hope, believing in the value of history, more specifically mythology, and its impact on human history. So we'll start with Pandora's box. There are several versions of the story, but this is the gist of it. In Greek mythology, Prometheus, the Titan, stole fire from Mount Olympus, gave it to man, and Zeus was furious. He ordered Prometheus bound and chained to the Caucasus Mountains. Every day an eagle would fly down and eat out his liver. At night, it would heal. Day after day, this went on until eventually Hercules went and killed the eagle and freed him, but that was much later on. Zeus wanted to punish man for accepting the fire. He had the first mortal woman molded from clay, and her name was Pandora. Pandora in Greek means the one who bears all gifts. The other gods assisted, and each gave Pandora a gift, with Zeus lastly instilling in her curiosity. Pandora was given to Prometheus' younger brother, Epimetheus, as a gift. Zeus then sent down a pottery jar, or box, and told her to never open it. Obviously, she opened it and released all the horrors of humanity: pain, poverty, war, disappointment. The list goes on. The last to escape from the jar is Elpis, or hope. Why was hope in the jar of evils? In several instances, I find in ancient Greeks did not view hope as a good thing. It is believed hope delayed the inevitable. In Aeschylus' Prometheus Bound, he writes, Prometheus said, I stopped mortals from foreseeing their own death. When asked how, he replies, I planted blind hopes in their heart. Though differences, we can see several similarities in the story between Pandora and another first woman, Eve. Interesting, but topic for another day. The next instance of hope I came across was in Norse mythology. According to the Glyphonine, written in the 13th century, hope is the saliva that drips from the mouth of the defeated Fenrir, forming the river Van, or translated in English to mean expectation or hope. It is not clear if the North thought hope was good or bad, but the North weren't known for sitting around and waiting. The Tao Te Ching was written in China somewhere in the 4th century BC by Lao Tzu, which is one of the two fundamental texts of both philosophical and religious Taoism. Chapter 13 reads, Success is as dangerous as failure. Hope is as hollow as fear. What does it mean that success is as dangerous as failure? Whether you go up the ladder or down it, your position is shaky. When you stand with your 2 feet on the ground, you will always keep your balance. What does it mean that hope is as hollow as fear? Hope and fear are both phantoms that arise from thinking of the self. When we don't see the self as self, what do we have to fear? See the world as yourself, have faith in the way things are, love the world as yourself, then you can care for all things. So you won't find hope in Taoism. In Hebrew, hope is translated into the word tikva. Strong's Concordance defines the tikva as a cord. Expectation and hope, it comes from a Hebrew root of kava, meaning to bind together. Collect, to expect, tarry, or wait. While hope in English is abstract, hope in Hebrew provides us with a strong visual, a bound cord, rope, or thread. Can not only be seen with our eyes, but is something we can grasp onto. In other words, hope is something real enough that we can cling to. Hope is not something out of our reach. It is applied in the Bible, in the book of Joshua, in the account of the 2 Israelite spies and the woman Rahab of Jericho. The men said to her, We shall free from this oath to you have made us swear, unless when we come into the land, you tie this cord of scarlet thread in the window, though which you let us down, and gather to yourself into your house your father and your mother, and all your brothers and all your father's household. She said, According to the words, so be it. So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. While tikva is used here in a literal sense as a cord of thread, it gives us a picture of its figurative picture of hope. The scarlet thread of Rahab's hope, it was her only guarantee that her household would be spared by the Israelites. Though the physical cord had been tied to ensure the safety, Rahab still had to wait for the realization of the spy's promise. This is where the root of tikva, kava, becomes relevant to our understanding. Most of us can relate to hope, but we too often forget that hope is rooted in waiting. Being patient, waiting for an expected thing or outcome is exceedingly difficult for the majority of us. The Bible is full of biblical heroes that struggled with waiting. Think about Abraham and Sarah's impatience with producing an heir. They eventually agreed to use the surrogate Hagar that produced Ishmael. We still see the effects of their impatience today as Ishmael's offspring in the constant unrest in the Middle East. On a side note, Rahab was a prostitute, like most biblical female heroes. She's also the mother of Boaz. Makes me wonder why hope unusually is between faith and charity. Is it, in fact, representing the tikvah and the cord binding faith to charity? Or maybe it's centered to represent one of the symbols, the anchor. I found myself sidetracked several times researching different cultures. One of them was with the Native American culture. We know Native Americans share their histories and traditions orally and from generation to generation. They use symbols as signs as an explanation. Of course, it varies from tribe to tribe, but here's two that I was able to find. The 8-pointed star symbolizes hope and guidance. A circle around other Native American symbols signifies protection. The circle has no break and cannot be broken. The inner star pointed at the 4 cardinal points, east, west, north, and south. The points of the outer circle led to the summer solstice, where the sun's path is the farthest in its north. The days are longest, a time of renewal and great potential and future for hope. The winter solstice, marking the onset of winter, the summer and winter equinox, when the days and nights are of equal length. Each are important times in the forthcoming year and symbols of hope for the future. The hope symbol as an 8-pointed star, therefore, represents the 4 cardinal points and their connection with the outermost points of the horizon, where the sun passes through the year, the solstice and the equinox points. The second symbol is the butterfly. Some tribes believe that butterflies can take wishes or hopes up to the Great Spirit. The elusive butterfly is often just out of reach, like hope, as the legend goes. If you capture a butterfly, whisper your wishes and hopes to it, and then release it to the heavens, you will be rewarded. It is believed that your hope and wish will be granted in gratitude for the freedom of the butterfly. These symbols are still used as tattoos and other numerous objects, such as teepees, totem poles, musical instruments, clothes, and war paint. In the Eastern Orthodox, we find hope as a 12-year-old girl and sister to charity and faith, daughters of Sophia, or wisdom. Her sisters were persecuted because of their belief in Christianity by the Roman Emperor Hadrian. As Sophia had 3 opportunities to deny Christ, as her 3 daughters, one by one, all steadfast in their faith, were tortured and killed. Later, they all became saints, and their belief in Christ was so deep that they would become martyrs rather than deny him. So it's a horrible story, but we can see hope as people. Though it can be argued it was their faith in Christ that gave them the courage and not hope. In the 1200s, St. Thomas Aquinas defined hope as a future good, difficult but possible to obtain by means of divine assistance, on whose help it leans. Thus, under the premise, we must have faith to believe in hope. St. Thomas also drafted 3 theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity. This is interesting because they vary slightly throughout Christianity. Faith, belief in God, and in the truth of his revelation, as well as obedience to him. Hope, the expectation of and desire of receiving, refraining from despair, and capability of not giving up. The belief that God will be eternally present in the human's life and never giving up on his love seems kind of mixed up with faith to me. Charity, a supernatural virtue that helps us love God and our neighbors more than ourselves. An interesting note is Geneva Bible of 1560 and the New Living Translation of 2007 replaced charity with love, which by the definition that is given means about the same thing. Give love to others more than yourself. In Catholicism, it is held that these virtues differ from the cardinal virtues in that they cannot be obtained by human effort. A person can only receive them by being infused through divine grace into the person. The anchor is generally accepted as the symbol of hope in Christianity, the symbol of hope in the future existence, because the anchor was regarded in ancient times as a symbol of safety for Christians. Christ is the unfailing hope of all who believe in him. St. Peter, St. Paul, and several of the other early church fathers speak in this sense. The epistles to the Hebrews 6:19 through 20 for the first time connect the idea of hope with the symbol of the anchor. And the verse reads, "We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters into the inner sanctuary behind the curtain, where our forerunner, Jesus, has entered on our behalf." A fragment of the inscription discovered in the catacombs of St. Domitia contains the anchor and the dates from the end of the 1st century. During the 2nd and 3rd century, these anchors occur frequently in the epitaphs of the catacombs. I was curious to see if there's any correlation between Rahab's cord and the rope we typically see on an anchor. But the rope on the anchor was first seen in the Lord High Admiral of Scotland in 1402. So wishful thinking, but fun fact. As I continue to search for results of hope in Christianity, I'm quickly overwhelmed not by the number of churches with hope in their name or number of nonprofits meant to help certain people, but the sheer number of sermons telling me I have to have hope. After the 3rd or 4th sermon, it became a distinct feeling that the preacher is attempting to be my hope between me and my faith. Through the research, it's fairly obvious each of these traditions and cultures had a different view on a different angle of hope. This brought me to the hope curve. Hope seems to be more of an emotional sliding scale that ranges from virtual certainty to utter depression. It can range within a single conversation across the whole spectrum. You can give a person hope, or you can crush it. Raise it out of the waters, or toss it around until the other person will gasp at whatever straw you throw them. The actual hope that people feel is not necessarily matched the real possibilities of success. Typically, we feel optimistic or pessimistic at their extremes. At zero probability, we are realistically pessimistic, and we stay this way until there is sufficient probability to break out of the fear of the loss. As this event becomes more likely, we become more disappropriately optimistic. This makes a lot of sense to me. I've watched people slowly die from disease that could not be cured. Their loved ones only had hope to blindly cling to. Would it be humane to tell them to stop trying? Of course not. There's a Russian saying that says hope dies last, and it must. Loved ones must feel like they did everything they could to ensure that they don't have guilt when everything goes wrong. So hope ends in fruition, but it ends as often as good as bad. So how does hope become an everyday thing in America? In John Gast's 1872 painting, American Progress, hope is depicted heading west. And if you look closely, you can see that hope is actually setting telegraph lines along the way. We know many did hope during the Western expansion, but again, they all took action in doing so. 1824, Ellis Island was America's largest and most active immigration station. Over 12 million immigrants were processed. 40% of Americans today can trace a relative through Ellis Island. For the vast majority of immigrants, Ellis Island was truly an island of hope, the first stop on their new opportunities and experiences in America that could take action and give everything to enter the land of opportunity. For approximately 2% of those who came to Ellis Island knew it by another name, the Island of Tears, a place where families were torn apart and individuals were denied entry into the United States. In 1932, the Revson brothers, Charles and Joseph, along with chemist Charles Lachman, founded Revlon. Charles Revson was quoted as saying, "In the factory we make cosmetics, in the stores we sell hope." 1992, Bill Clinton played off coming from Hope, Arkansas, and ends with bringing hope back to the American dream. Very well done, showing a man that grew up like you and I and rose to the top. He portrays hope as the journey to better, and he wants to help us. So take a look at that for those who might not remember it.
I was born in a little town called Hope, Arkansas. 3 months after
Good.
my father died. I remember that old 2-story house where I lived with my grandparents. They had very limited incomes. It was in 1963 that I went to Washington and met President Kennedy at the Boys Nation program. And I remember just thinking what an incredible country this was, that somebody like me, had no money or anything, would be given the opportunity to meet the president. That's when I decided that I could really do public service because I cared so much about people. I worked my way through law school with part-time jobs, anything I could find. And after I graduated, I really didn't care about making a lot of money. I just wanted to go home and see if I could make a difference. We've worked hard in education and healthcare to create jobs, and we've made real progress. Now it's exhilarating to me to think that as president, I can help to change all our people's lives for the better and bring hope back to the American dream.
Powerful and ingenious. In 2008, Barack Obama continued that message and built a good amount of campaign around it. His team had branded him so well that even today, if you ask one of his supporters what they thought of President Obama, you will almost always hear hope. After all that, I don't know what hope is meant to mean in our ritual. None of that really helped. Well. Our ritual was written in a time when the average expectancy was 35-ish, mostly due to infant mortality. Pulling that percentage down. Could that be why we put hope in our ritual? If so, what now? Do we need it? After all, what would a Freemason hope for in Freemasonry that he can't achieve through hard work and determination? At the end of the day, hope does belong in our ritual. Not in the watered-down style we see in today's society. I believe we as Freemasons are meant to be the hope. Not in the take over the world sense, but Freemasons have been the hope centuries before us. We're going to look at 3 examples. In the United States, we still revere George Washington, an imperfect man whose military career started out in disaster. When in 1754, a 22-year-old young Washington helped spark the French Indian War when a Seneca chief known as the Half King and his friends, who were scouts for Washington, attacked a French scouting party. The event ended with the Half King washing his hands in the brains of a French emissary. Washington was mortified and then was counterattacked, which led to him surrendering. The surrender terms, written in French, poorly translated, so Washington says, allowed Washington and his troops to return to Virginia in peace, with the one clause admitting that he had assassinated the French emissary, something that Washington hotly contested for the rest of his life, despite the signature on the document. 21 years later, this failure became the hope of the colonies. It can be argued that there were many other reasons for Washington's success, but the bottom line was it was Washington that everyone hoped would end the war. Our esteemed brother connected faith with charity. In his case, was freedom. Shortly before Christmas of 1938, 29-year-old Nicholas Winton, a stockbroker, was planning a ski trip in Switzerland. A friend who was supposed to join Nicholas on the ski trip called out from Prague, and he had said, I was sent there to help the people in trouble with the Germans. So Winton said, all right, well, I'm going to go to Prague. He went to Prague, and he couldn't believe the situation after visiting the refugee camps. When the local Jewish families heard that Nicholas wanted to help, they began knocking on his door all hours of the night, looking for hope, not for themselves, but for their children. A 29-year-old man formed an organization to rescue children 17 and under from the people that had parents on Hitler's blacklist. Nicholas encountered endless rejection from several countries, and only Great Britain was willing to help, with the stipulation that each child must have a family assigned and raise 50 pounds per child to cover the later return costs. To put the level of hopelessness in perspective, these parents knew their time was limited. They put all their hopes in a 29-year-old man they didn't know. Now I have a daughter at home, and I can't imagine giving her up and being in that level of desperation. I'm sure most of you couldn't either, knowing that you would never see him again. In all, 669 children were saved out of well over 2,000. The last group of 250 boarded the train, and the train was stopped. Germany had invaded Poland, and Nicholas's operation was shut down. Of those 250 children stopped, 2 survived the war. So what then? Nicholas had been fired from his job because his boss thought he was wasting time, so he joined the Royal Air Force. Came home after the war, packed up all his scrapbooks, put them in the attic. 50 years later, his wife discovered them. She had no idea of her husband's past. In the late 1980s, his wife tricked him into going on a BBC show, That's Life, where 30 or so of the survivors were able to finally meet their hero and thank him. None of them knew who saved them all those years ago. Brother Nicholas was the hope. He was all those families had. Without Nicholas, the world would be one less poet, filmmaker, chief rabbi, member of parliament, or TV journalist. To date, over 6,000 people can trace their ancestry through Nicholas. How about Winston Churchill? Like Washington, Winston's life had its share of failure. During World War I, Winston was the First Lord of the Admiralty, which is the political head of the Royal Navy. Spearheading an operation in the Dardanelles, also known as Gallipoli, 46,000 Allied forces were lost during the year-long campaign. Winston Churchill resigned and fell into a deep depression, which he called the Black Dog. Yet 25 years later, on the day the Nazis invaded France, Neville Chamberlain resigned. Winston found himself as the prime minister. For the next 5 years, Winston was the hope of not only Great Britain, but free Europe. During that period, Winston had to make horrible decisions for the greater good. He ordered the destruction of the French fleet after the French surrendered to prevent the ships from going into enemy hands. He knew Coventry was going to be bombed, and he couldn't let the citizens know because he couldn't let the Nazis know that their Enigma code had been broken. He turned a blind eye and went to bed. I can't imagine he slept. His speeches captivated the world, which everyone he wrote himself. They were clung on to people. He was their last hope. Yet once the war is over, Winston lost the next election. Brother Winston was knighted. He had over 320,000 people and 150 million people. In 2002, he was voted the greatest Briton of all time, from failure to nation's hero in one lifetime. It'd be unfair of me not to note, Winston drank and smoked cigars excessively. During Prohibition, he came to the United States with a doctor's note to drink as medicine, and he lived to be 90 years old. In the case of Churchill and Washington, it's interesting to note how similar the stories are. Both completed the hero's journey in their lifetime. Both rode the hope scale from lowest point to the highest point. All three of these examples were in extreme times. World-changing situations where men stepped up to the highest level. As Freemasons, luckily, none of us will ever find ourselves in a situation where so much is needed from us. That does not mean that someone does not need us to be their hope now. There are smaller needs every day in the world. I ask you to remember this the next time a brother hopes for something in Lodge, like getting better or finding members. Remind him he's the hope. Recently watched a documentary on the lack of initiatic experience, and it was claimed only 17% of today's kids have a positive outlook on their fathers. This is backed by the report from the Census Bureau in 2017, where 19.7 million children in America, 1 in 4, live without a father at home. We have a huge opportunity to change the world, and not in the way we've looked at previously today, but one younger person at a time. We must be the hope that they need. Thank you.
Brother Bryan, keep the question into the mic as I give it to you so people at home might hear them. We have 2 questions so far. Brother Andrew Lewis says, what subject in our symbolism gives you the most hope?
The subject that would give me, or the symbol that would give me the most hope, I would say would be the sword pointed at the naked heart. Because I think that's the one that keeps us to truth. And from truth, we can be hope.
Very good. When times are dark, what gives you hope?
I think when times are dark, what gives me hope is my brothers. If you look at the world right now, we're in a situation, we're sitting in a room, everybody, I know people at home can't see it, but everyone's 6 feet apart from each other, but yet we're still here. You know, we're still supporting each other. And I mean, I think that that's the symbol of hope.
Wonderful. I'll now turn it over to anybody in the room for questions. We've got about 13, 14 minutes for questions. So if we finish early, then we can have some extra break time as well. But any other questions for Brother Bryan?
I think if I understood you correctly, you said that some of the interpretations of hope kind of struggled up with faith. What to you are the primary distinctions between faith and hope?
So faith is believing in God. And to me, hope is believing through my exertions that faith will push me through hope. So believing I can do it and pushing forward, that's the hope to me, rather than just having faith in God. So, yes, brother.
This is one of the things this is something that I've started with recently. I promised that I would memorize the biblical way, second degree circumambulation. But I haven't memorized the biblical church. And I played with some friends from church other days. And it's all in line with what you were saying. Are you under the impression that faith and hope exists kind of simultaneously in your mind? Charity, faith is your spark, and hope is your gas, and the charity is like a salamander burning out there with the actual creation of the concept.
I would say to an extent. To me, faith is always there. Hope's always available, and so is charity. I would say the hope would be more of the spark, because once you put in your head, if you take hope and replace it with action in your head and you just start rolling, like none of this happens with hope, right? All the work that RJ did to get us here today, there's no hope in it, really. Ultimately, there's always modifications. You got people at home right now, they're watching, so that's how I see it.
So first, Brother Simmons, thanks for talk today. Tremendous. When you went into creating this talk, given what you found, given what you went through, did you come out with a different point of view than maybe you had gone in with? And what sparked you to create the talk in the first place?
Yes. So I went in completely. No, I shouldn't say I went in completely open. I've been called cynical a few times by a few brothers in this room, but I went in completely against hope. Like I didn't see the value of it. Like us, you go to so many lodges and they're just garbage. They show up, they do their meeting. There's no value at all. Like, what's the point? And then they're like, oh, well, our building's falling apart. Woe is me. Like, suck it up. Like, fix it. So I came out and I found a value for hope, in society now. But yeah, I went in completely negative against it. And I started, the whole presentation was designed to actually get rid of hope, but I found a reason for it. So that's how it ended up the way it did. All right. Any other questions? Cool.
Okay.